Hello, everyone. I'm just giving this a moment here before we get started. Get everybody in the room. I see you all coming in. Welcome, welcome. So thank you for joining us today for the Alternative Housing Models for Aging in Community webinar with Marianne Kilkenny. A warm welcome to all of you. My name is Lauren, and I'm the program director here at the Foundation for Intentional Community, and I'm joining you today from Portland, Oregon. And now I'm going to introduce our very special guest, Marianne Kilkenny. Marianne is recognized as a national expert in aging in community. She facilitates workshops and training sessions and webinars for individuals, groups, and communities truly interested in designing, developing, and creating their own alternative housing models. Marianne is a speaker, coach, and the grand nudge who helps individuals and groups create innovative models for living and aging in community. Her mission is to champion alternative housing choices for older adults who want to experience camaraderie, connection, and confidence in their later years. She has been featured on NBC Nightly News, CBS Early Show, ABC News, and NPR, and has been published in the New York Times, AARP Magazine, Marketplace Money, The Washington Post, and other media outlets about the financial, safety, and social benefits of alternative housing models. She is also the author of Your Quest for Home, a guidebook to find the ideal community for your later years, and offers online classes on her book and coaching to take action. And with that, I am thrilled to welcome Marianne Kilkenny. Thank you for joining us today and sharing your wisdom with us. Over to you, Marianne.
Thanks, Lauren. I'm coming to you from Asheville, North Carolina. And Lauren did all the great stuff about, get a drink, take deep breaths, get ready. So I don't have to do any of that. I'm not used to this. Thank you so much to the Foundation for Intentional Communities, which I have been a fan of forever, and it's only getting better. And they didn't pay me to say that even. So, so today, the focus is on alternative living arrangements for us as we age. So what that is that it's the non-medical look at aging. So there's a lot of things about aging that go to health-centric things. This is going to be kind of the opposite of that. So put your seatbelts on, because I'm going to get you ready to look at things a little bit differently than maybe you have in the past. Otherwise, why spend 90 minutes with me? So glad you're here. I'm going to talk about this from, as you would expect, the only place I know, which is my own experience, my own experiments, my own mistakes, because I don't want you to make the same ones. You get to make your own. So there's a challenge in this. Well, there's more than one. I might use that word more often than probably you want me to, but I'm going to do it anyway. And that is, I'm going to challenge you about some of the terminology that we have gotten used to using, so that you have a possibility of actually changing that. So here we go. First of all, I think it's really important, as we already talked about this, to get an idea a little bit more about where you're from, which you've told me. But beyond that is, I'd love to know in the chat, how many of you own your own home? That's a yes or a no. You probably know whether you own a home or you don't. Well, you might own the home with the bank, but I mean, it's the same thing. Okay. Great. Excellent. All right, we got lots of interesting answers, and I'm going to go on, because if I read all those, you guys won't get anything out of the rest of the time. But thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Another thing I'd love to know is sort of the demographics of the people that are with us. So tell me if you're, and this is completely voluntary, completely, and that is, how many of you might be under 50 years old, years young, or 50 to 70, or over 70? Love this group. You're so fast. Look at that. Oh my goodness. Thank you, thank you, thank you. All right. The one thing we all have in common, no matter what, we're all aging. And I'm also going to ask you a little bit about if you have children, because I think this plays into this topic a great deal. So if you have children, C. If you have no children, just put NC, like where, actually, where the state that I live in. Perfect, perfect, perfect. Thank you. Thank you. That really helps me a lot. And this is not a question for chatting necessarily. It's one for you to, it's a pretty easy question to ponder and answer, and that is, how many of you have taken care of a sibling, a spouse, a parent, a child who was in poor health, was infirmed, and maybe that experience is what has brought you to this particular webinar? Yeah. Yeah. Well, Lauren's going to show you next, in the next slide, Betty. Betty is my mom. Yeah, and Betty, actually, I dedicated my book to her. And she died in the hospital in 2003 after she had a long stay in assisted living and a SNF, which is a skilled nursing facility. She had been married to my dad for 63 years. Yeah, long time. And he died in a skilled nursing facility 51 weeks later. So my interest in this is very personal. As a woman who's divorced and has no children, I thought that it was pretty important that I get on this right away. And I have said many, many, many times, and that is, I'm not going to go to one of those places. Well, let me define one of those places. And I'm speaking primarily here to our US participants, because I know in other countries, oftentimes there are other alternatives, as well as home caring for siblings and family in the home. I'm getting to that. So these are called continuing care retirement communities. The one like my parents elected to go to when the time came. They luckily decided themselves. My sister and I did not have to go about finding one for them, but at the same time, they were not at all interested or happy to be going there when the emergency that had my mother need to go there happened. A little bit more about continuing care retirement communities. Usually you'll hear people talk about independent living, assisted living, and also skilled nursing, or SNF, SNF, and we now have memory care. Yes. So, and some are run by religious groups, and there are many that are profit driven. And I think that probably the growth of these from, I mean, the research and some of the things that I have found out is basically, I think, is a lot of the movement within the United States or in other places is when women actually went to work, because we were, as women, oftentimes in the family, the caregivers. And it just so happened that Medicaid and Medicare was able to pay a lot into this fund for people. Yeah. So it's not the only solution. And I'm going to say another thing that's and just let it sit. And I think we all know what happened to our elders in nursing homes in the last 2 years during the pandemic. I don't think it's necessarily a place that most people are electing to go to, and certainly not the people that I think of myself as a boomer or whatever you call yourself. We're not going to live in the same way that our parents did. So my parents inspired me to do the work that I am doing. Okay, so aging in place. A few things that we can do is aging in place might mean you live with relatives. It might mean that you build something in the backyard, which we call accessory dwelling units. Some of you all know about that. If not, I prefer to not call them granny flats, but this is a good possibility. Granny pod, sure. Collaborative support might be neighbors, might be friends. Well, I'll tell you a little bit more about some of the ones that I recommend. You could bring help into the home, and you could also have home health or non-medical support agencies. Again, getting these people oftentimes is a challenge. And in the last 2 years, bringing new people into the home has also been scary as well. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the other things. So in the next slide, I'm going to talk give you a little bit more of a definition. Oop, you're good. Aging in place. Yeah. Thanks, Lauren. So this is a definition of aging in place. And I'm doing this because many of us talk about we want to age in place. Defined here. And it is, the statistic says that 87% to 93% of us want to stay right where we're at in our homes. And what that means is we want to stay where our friends are, where our neighbors are, if at all possible. Yeah, that's the definition that I'm sticking with on aging in place. And again, remember I told you I'm going to challenge you to look at some of the terms that we use and expand on those a little bit. Very important. So I'm going to let you just pause for a moment, and I'd like you to take out that paper and pencil that I asked you to do. And define for you, write a couple sentences about aging in place, what it means to you. So while you ponder that, and that is, what about your home is it that makes you want to stay there and age? Write a couple of bullet points. Is it the physical pieces of it? Is it your neighbors? Is it the climate? Is it affordable? So thank you. And the importance of autonomy and the importance of friends and connection. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Dr. Bill Thomas. He is a geriatrician, a Harvard-trained doctor, and someone in this movement that has sort of what I think of as blown up the idea of nursing homes because he worked in one in the first part of his career, and ever since has been talking about what kinds of things can be alternatives. The kind of alternatives that he has come up with through the 30 years maybe that he has worked on this, from one thing to the other. Some of you might be familiar with the Eden alternative. If you ever did visit someone in a nursing home, sometimes there is pets, there are plants. This was the Eden alternative to give elders in a nursing home some locus of control over their environment. Very important. And he also has the greenhouse project, which is 9 or 10 rooms with their own bathrooms, a table and caregivers where people have some autonomy. And somebody's talking about that they have a greenhouse model as a possibility. Now, I've been to a number of Dr. Thomas's workshops, and this is where I'm going to start challenging you and blowing things up for you, and that is, he said, aging in place is that part of us that says, hold on to the banister and says, you are not taking me to those places. I'm staying right here. I think my parents, had they had the strength, probably would have done that because they did not want to go to the home. But aging in place has become more in vogue. So again, the challenge to you is what we're talking about is aging in community. That is around connected, being around other people. Very important. So on the next slide, someone much smarter than me, Dr. M. Scott Peck, said this quote: "In and through community lies the salvation of the world." That's pretty big. We're all in the right place, clearly. Yeah. Thank you for smart people. Now, M. Scott Peck, you might remember him from all the reading we did as young people. He wrote A Different Drum and The Road Less Traveled. I think that was all good reading for us when we were hippies. So moving right along, I challenge you now to start looking at the aging in community principles. This is expanding what we're talking about to say, is the home that you are in, the place that you are in, have these possibilities? Luckily, I'm going to explain them to you. And what I'd like you to do is, with your paper and pencil, as I describe these, give yourself a rating of where you live or where you intend to live on these. 0 is not quite so good. 5 is rocking it, rocking it. So of these 6 principles of aging in community, where might you be? So start with inclusive. That would be all ages, races, ethnicities, abilities, and especially for elders. 0, I'm going to ask you to add these all up. This is also a math exercise. 0 to 5, sustainable. And that's environmentally, economically, socially, and actually is where you live on a small scale, in that we're looking at the resources that we're using of the whole of the earth. So the smaller is better. Healthy supports wellness, body, mind, and spirit, and it prepares you the programs for systems that support dealing with death, disease, and disability. This rolls right into accessible. And this is where lots of people say, is my home accessible? And you can actually get to the place that you're making it accessible and universal design. And is there transportation around? This is pretty much just giving you a little bit of information about what aging in community principles are and where your home actually might, or the place that you're wanting to live, falls into the aging in community principles. Interdependent. And this is reciprocity, because I think that many of us want to be independent, and aging in community really fosters interdependence across the age groups. So mutual support for family, friends, and neighbors across the generations. And most importantly, well, they're all important, but is engaged. How much are you engaged in life? Social things, education, creativity. When you think of where you are, where are the juices really flowing? That's being in community and aging in community. Hopefully that gives you some information of the aging in community principles and where your community or where you intend to live flows within that. A lot of times people talk about, boy, getting old is really, really expensive. And I have to say that probably does agree, especially when we're talking about health-related things. But there's also another expense that I want to go in a different way than it's the same way. And that is, everybody heard of what social capital is? Robert Putnam, I believe, coined the phrase social capital in bowling in, oh my God, I just forgot what it was. Bowling Alone, thanks Neil. Bowling Alone, which you see what that looks like, bowling alone. Be pretty lonely. And yeah, so what we want to do is, how do we raise, not only make it so that our social capital is raised, which also can make the possibility of our financial needs lowered because we're connecting with other folks. Okay, take your breath, and that is a time for reflection now. Now, in the last couple of years, we have not been able to gather as much for many of us as we would like. So it might mean that you in this reflection goes to a time when you were able to do that together. And that is a feeling of camaraderie, connection, sitting in a circle with people, breaking bread. Maybe the circle was outside. That's social capital. And aging in community is an answer to raising that. Absolutely. I often talk to people when I talk about community, and then I will ask them about, what they consider it to be. And many times, and maybe you've met these people too, or maybe you are these people, and there's someone that says, I've been talking to my friends about this for years. We're gonna go together in a subdivision or a condo or an apartment building, or we're gonna buy a piece of land and put houses on it, or we're gonna buy a trailer park. Yeah, so my question is usually, and what have you done so far? The blessing of aging is there's a sense of urgency to do this, to move forward with it. And that's what I'm going to ask you to do today from what you're learning today. Yeah. Been there and nothing gets done. So I'm going to pressure you a little bit more to take new steps. A little fun. How many of you might be aware of something called the niche communities? Yeah, niche communities I think of as golfing communities, communities around a particular, horses, golf. Those are the two that come to mind first of all. Sure. And a little fun fact. So how many of you have heard of Margaritaville? Like the song from Jimmy Buffett? I couldn't help it. I had to put this one in here because there's actually 3 of them, and it's called Latitude Margaritaville, and it's a community for over 55 people. And as you would expect, the people that are attracted to it are people who are familiar with Jimmy Buffett and Margaritaville and the song and having a good time. So right within that tells you a lot. There's a niche there. Also, spiritual communities often have a jargon that they can have what I think of as the community glue, that we can actually talk to each other with the same jargon, the same rule, the same languaging more than anything. So moving on to something a little bit lighter. Well, I guess Margaritaville was pretty light. Who recognizes these television shows that I think of as looking at alternative housing models through the years? We've got, tell me who we got there. Mary Tyler Moore, right? She lived in an apartment. Who else? The Honeymooners, thank you. They lived in an apartment. There were 2 couples. Yeah, black and white. And Betty White is there. Yep. Golden Girls isn't here yet. Three's Company. And Hot in Cleveland is the one that has Betty White in it, where they're all sitting in the back porch of a farmhouse where actually 3 of them live. So this is some examples of how television brought us into new models for living, even before we actually knew it. So the next slide shows us something that someone already mentioned, and that is, so I'm going to start talking to you a little bit more now about actually the review of the options in housing. I know you were wondering, okay, where are we going to do this? One of them is shared housing. Probably the people that are most known for this, and I often have talked to people about, I want to live like the Golden Girls. Just so happens I also do. And that is, this is an iconic 80s show that showed 4 women living in the same house. So collaborative living doesn't necessarily have to be in a single family home. It could be in an apartment, that kind of thing. So again, Golden Girls house. Also the books that are here are by Joan Medlicott, where she talks about 3 women that live in a house together. Great 9 book series. And I want you to, so shared housing is an alternative possibility, collaborative, and there's also other names for this. Anybody know what some of the other names might be? Co-living, householding. Again, terminologies I'm going to be a stickler on. Co-homing, yeah. Cohabitation. And my favorite is not calling it roommates, but housemates, because we share a house. I shared a room in college. I'm not sure I want to ever do that again. Yeah. So the next slide moves us into what is called co-housing. And co-housing was founded in Denmark and has moved to this country by a gentleman by the name of Chuck Durrett that some of you might be familiar with, and his wife. And there is there's a FIC workshop on co-housing. So I'm not going to go into this in any great detail, but co-housing did come from Denmark. There is no hyphen in it the way I learned it from Chuck. And it's not the same as shared housing. It actually is quite different because there's the whole community is developed, founded, well, at least developed by the participants to meet the needs of those participants. And this is a perfect picture of it. It's also got private space and public space, and it's common facilities. There's not a hierarchy in managing it. Oftentimes decisions are made by consensus or sociocracy. And one of the important things that I think is definitely no shared economy. I think that might come from the commune movement, that no, there's no shared economy. And also there is a senior co-housing movement as well in the last, I'd say probably 8 to 10 years. And a friend of mine, Dean Peterson, who developed Elder Spirit in Abington, Virginia, it took 10 years for it to get built, but it is very successful. I talked to her the other day, and they have people living there from the ages of 60 to 90. That's a big age range, very successfully. And that means that you can have a choice whether you want to live with people in the same age group or multiple age groups if you were in another co-housing. And like I said, I'm not going to get into that because there's a whole cadre and a whole webinar and workshop about co-housing that's offered that's, I'm sure, fabulous. Okay, another question for you. Ready? How many of you know your neighbors? Yes? Yeah. And this is no meaning more than I wave at them in the morning when I'm leaving or when I'm coming back. Yeah. Great. Not everybody does. And I encourage that with the next slide, Lauren. And that is, these are neighborhoods. This is where you live. There's usually not many boundaries or fences. And a question for you along with, do you know your neighbors, came up when I recently saw an ambulance that went to, I mean, you notice when an ambulance comes to a neighborhood or anywhere, and I was wondering what was happening with those people. So the question to you is, if you heard an ambulance in your neighborhood, what would you do? Would you go look? Would you do you know your neighbors well enough to ask what might be going on? Wonderful. Very important to know your neighbors, especially as we age. Yes, checking on your neighbor, very important. I've done that for years. In Davis, California, a long time ago, the people in that neighborhood wanted to form a community, which is very possible. And what they started doing is communicating with each other, of course, and then decided to take down the fences. Yeah. So that's a very important thing to be aware of, that it's viable to be able to do it in your own neighborhood. The next slide is sort of a blend of not the purists of co-housing, but also of neighborhoods, and that's pocket neighborhoods, which was pretty much coined, I think, by Ross Chapin, who's an architect. And you can see pictures of this where it's very similar to co-housing, where the parking is in the periphery, so that there's lots of interaction between the neighbors. The difference is that Ross Chapin did this back in the mid-90s up in Washington State, has a beautiful book. And of course, in the mid-90s, I don't know about you guys, but most of what was being built then was McMansions. This model is very popular now. Probably you've seen something like it, and it's usually done by a developer. But that way, there's a way for you to, just by the layout of it, to be able to know your neighbors, because again, it's a smaller footprint. And oftentimes you hope to have some kind of community building, much like what co-housing has. Yeah. So moving right along. So what might I have missed when you think of places to live as we age, as far as aging in community? There's lots of different terms. The importance of the pathways. Thank you. Thank you, Neil, for putting up Ross's book. Mobile homes. Yeah. Neighborhoods, pocket neighborhoods. Tiny houses. Great. Thank you all for your participation. And the next slide is about something called NORCs, naturally occurring retirement communities. And naturally occurring retirement communities are communities. It could be an apartment building, it could be a neighborhood, it could be a high-rise that it was not originally intended for senior living, but has evolved to be senior living. ARP says that there's about 5,000 of these. I think it was very funny. I was giving a talk a few years ago, and we were talking about what a naturally occurring retirement community is. And there was all this buzz over in the corner from a whole group of people. And what they came to realize was that they actually are a NORC, a natural occurring retirement community, because they have all aged in the same neighborhood. They share the same, house cleaner or plumber and services like that. So they were very excited to know that they belong to something, and it's a naturally occurring retirement community. One of my favorite stories about naturally occurring retirement communities is the Beacon Hill Village. And this is the story of this, as I heard it, was there were a group of women that lived in Beacon Hill who had no desire to go anywhere else. So they pooled their money, they hired a project manager, and they decided, we'll just have the project manager, we'll get the services from various people, we'll vet the people, we'll have volunteers. And when you, for instance, my favorite one is, the cat is sick, I don't drive, or it's too dark for me to drive, and I call the main number of this place because I'm a member of the Beacon Hill Village. And someone comes to pick me up with my kitty, and we go off to the vet. I've made one phone call, and it's because I have a membership in this particular NORC that has a project. What expanded from that was they decided they'd write a manual. And from that, other people have started villages, what is called villages, and there's the village to village network. You could find that. Neil might be able to give you a link to that. And it's a whole variety of natural occurring retirement communities who have come together, and they're all entirely different. The important thing about these is that they really have the flavor of the particular neighborhood, the particular people that live there. It makes it possible for people to stay in their homes longer, to stay connected, to have the services that they need. And there's lots of volunteers. I mean, think about technology. They talk about that kind of thing. Home repairs. I have a friend that recently found out that in her town, there's a village network. And she actually called the number and was able to have somebody show up to help her with mulch, to put in a light bulb, some things that if you live alone or on your own, if you could call one number and they would be able to vet people that they send out to your home, I think that that's probably worth it. And a lot of people say, well, gee, that's really expensive. But I think most of these village to village networks also have ways to allow people into the program that don't have the funds. So that's the village to village network, another possibility of being able to age in community and to stay connected. And not to forget the importance in the next slide of, as I've seen in the scrolling, people talking about wanting to live with other age groups, not just with our own age group. So I bring this up because I want to make sure that we all take into account, are you one of those people? Does your neighborhood give you that? Can you move, go to one where there's a variety, and the variety that allows you to actually age in community? And everybody's different, you know. Some people don't want to have little kids running around, and others would say, I can't live without it. Drinking miso, okay. We'll get to that, Maddie. Yeah. So let's move right on along. And next is a big topic. So that's why I said you need to have a drink of water here. A lot of information, and I'm comparing shared housing, neighborhoods, and co-housing from the standpoint of costs, ease and challenges, and interactions. So shared housing is usually going to be affordable because it's probably where you live, or you're looking into a house that you could share with someone else. Again, a neighborhood is probably the least expensive because hopefully you live there now. Story about a woman who for years and years came to our meetings about community, who lived in a neighborhood, and she really thought probably that her neighbors weren't people she wanted to be in community with. And we had a snowstorm, and that's quite unusual in Asheville, North Carolina. And I talked to her months later, and I said, so how's it going on your community search? She said, oh my gosh, when we had the snowstorm, I realized I have a whole community. Oh my gosh, right. So she was able to find her community because of adversity. Now, co-housing, I think somebody mentioned that it's expensive. Yeah, it's perceived because you live in co-housing with a bunch of other people that it's going to be cheaper. And I'm sure that they'll touch on this in the seminar. But again, co-housing is your own house, and you also pay for community property as well. So that's an illusion I want to make sure that you're aware of. And there's also a large and oftentimes upfront investment, and also a large investment in time. Yeah. So just a couple of pointers that I was challenging you on. So then there's the ease or the challenges with each one of these. So looking at shared housing could be as easy as finding a house. The challenge is probably finding the right people or persons to live with. And you're going to have a lot of challenges when it comes to, now, you share lots of common space in a shared house. You need to agree upon food and decisions and bills and is everything getting paid. So a little aside on this from Marianne, the Grand Nudge, and that is, having lived in shared housing, I live in it now, I have often talked about the 5 biggies that I get to give you a few tips on. And that is the things that are often going to cause conflict, whether it's a shared house, primarily a shared house, is pets, temperature, guests, noise, television, and cleanliness. If you live in a community, you might be able to relate to these. In a neighborhood, again, for as far as cleaning products, as far as it's pretty immediate, trying to get you into community, but not everybody's going to buy into it or have the same desire for the activities that you want to do. And oh yeah, the challenges are also, you don't pick your neighbors. They just pick the house and they live by you. And oftentimes there's also probably a distance between the houses, and in some cases quite a bit of distance. And the challenges with moving to an area where you don't know people other than that they just bought a house is you might actually have differences of opinions about lots of things. So as you attempt to form community within your neighborhood, those will be some of the challenges. Thanks, Jim, for redoing those. The interactions part of this is, as you would expect, a shared house is probably the least private. You have daily interactions in most cases, dependent on the house. And then the interactions in co-housing, you're going to have them in the common house. You're going to have them possibly at meals, outside space, going to the mailbox. There's going to be frequent interactions. Now, again, I said in the neighborhood, you're not going to have that much reason to see your neighbors. I don't know about you, but when I lived in San Jose, most of us got home from work, drove into the garage door came down, and that was the end of it until I waved at my neighbors the next day. So again, neighbor, and you might have, the only thing you might share is the street or the walkways, but your neighborhood is the most private, there's the least you share, and the interactions are fewer. Unless what? Unless you make an effort to make your neighborhood your community. So let's see. I have covered a lot of ground. You guys have all been talking to each other, and I can only look at so many things. So on the next slide, I'm going to give you a few resources, of which there's a plethora of resources. Now, I have little stickies all over mine because these are the things that I wanted to use at a time when I did a workshop. And one is, and the reason I chose these 2 books, of all the books, of course, you would know that I have plenty of books. And that is, they are sort of an overview of the options that are possible with aging in community. And that is, it just so happens that the Aging in Community book by Janice Blanchard has Dean Peterson, who founded and developed Elder Spirit, right there in front, and that's Elder Spirit behind her. And then the other book is, with a little help from our friends, Creating Community as We Grow Older by Beth Baker. And she's, by far, it's one of the best overviews of the possibilities of community as we age. And it's very well written, is the other part of it that I really, really liked. And she interviewed tons of people. And like I said, she's a great writer. Now, you could also search the internet forever. And I'm sure that but some of us learn, reading these things called books. So I encourage you, if this is a topic that you really, really, really are interested in and want to know more about, I suggest that you buy one of those, get them on thrift books, something like that. Thank you, Neil. What would I do without Neil putting things up for us in the chat? And the next book, I had to have something about my book in here, right? Thank you very much. Lauren mentioned it originally, and it is a book. It's a workbook, and it's for people that might be interested in doing this and want to really go through what is it, when is it, how is it going to happen, and a lot of it is about what I found, which is the roadblocks in actually having this happen, kind of like those people that talk to each other and talk to each other and talk to each other and talk to each other, but nothing ever really happens. That was my frustration, and that's why I wrote this book. And I have to tell you, this is a secret, and I'm telling all of you, and that is, I was so annoyed that I had not found my community, what I defined as my community. And there's somehow, I don't know what happened, but a voice, my intuition actually said, well, maybe if you did the exercises in your book yourself, you would actually get closer to what it is you want. You're saying that to other people, take your own advice. So I did, and I'd like to say I'm there, and that is just a little secret. Don't tell anybody. So I've covered aging in place, aging in community, looking at what you have around you, your neighborhood, some of the terminology, co-housing, shared housing, the differences in those terms, how to spell co-housing without the hyphen. And all of this is really critically important to you just sort of moving on with things. So next slide, next two slides, let's move into, we already know about me. You can find me. I think Lauren's going to send some stuff out too. It was in the chat. Love to talk to you. So this is the action piece of this, because I gave you a lot of information. Hopefully it was helpful to you to look at, okay, what can I do? What do I have? What am I interested in? Where has this pushed me a little bit? Because I want you to have a little bit of a push, because that's why I'm the grand nudge. I want to push you gently into community. And as you ponder that, as you ponder what's next for you, I'd like you now, before the next slide, I'd like you to write down this week, what are you going to do? It might be you're going to talk to your neighbor. It might be you're going to buy one of those books. Maybe it's going to be, I'm going to stop talking about this, and I'm going to take one of these classes and get going. I suggest that. So there's many people that are a lot smarter than me. One whose quote I used before. And the next quote is one of my favorites. One of the oldest human needs is having someone to wonder, where are you when you don't come home at night? And another question is, in the next slide, yeah, who will leave the light on for you? This is a talk that I do because I actually have lots of experience with the use of light. And in the shared house that I lived in for years, we left the light on until the last person was home. And I'll never forget coming home to the light being on for me. And I knew that somebody wondered where I was and wondered whether I was home or not. Thank you for your attention. I know it was a lot, and I have a lot more to share if you would really like anything more. But now I think it's time for you to ask questions.
Yes, thank you, Marianne. We do have some questions lined up here. The first one is from Beverly. Do you ever age out of joining a community?
My opinion on that is, I think it depends on when you start. I remember somebody saying that they wanted to be part of a community, and an older person, actually older than me, said, well, it was really important for me to get there so that I could contribute during the time when I was more physically fit. And I was able to later on really feel I belonged there so that I could sit and shell peas and everybody knew that I had done my part. So I would say, do it now, and that would avoid aging out in the community.
Thank you, Marianne.
Mm-hmm.
Let's see, there is another question here. This one's from Sandy. How do senior co-housing communities deal with the aging population services and needs if they are dependent on paid help and services? Is that sustainable or interdependent?
Boy, that's a $50 million question. I think that my experience that I've like in talking to people at Elder Spirit, clearly people come in and they have to have what the plan might be for them if something medically happens. If I'm trying to get to that was a long question. But again, there's a lot of things that in co-housing, in senior co-housing as well, both of them, that there's a lot that neighbors can do based on agreements that have been made. That, again, you're not probably going to have somebody say, the things that are difficult for people to do, but there might be somebody that says, I can come over and help you with your medications. I can change the dressing on that. And again, putting it out to those people with the possibility of a backup plan. And that's what Elder Spirit does. They have had people that have left the community and gone to a facility, and guess what happens? The people go and visit them, which is bringing the community to where that person now, based on their health, has gone. Hopefully that answered your question.
Thank you, Marianne, and thank you for that question, Sandy. The next one is from AJ. Can you talk more about your personal journey, where you landed and how you got there? Some of these models are so great, but so hard to actually realize.
How much time you got? Wait, no, yeah. I moved to Asheville 16 years ago after I retired. And in that time, I lived in a neighborhood where I actually had neighbors that I knew when I moved there. It was organized based because I said I wanted to live in community. That was 3 years, and then the next I moved into a household. I shared a house with another person with the same name. That was really exciting. And then I moved on to another home by myself. And then the next 4 years I spent in a house with, in most times, either 4 or 3 other housemates here in Asheville. I did that for 4 years. Then I lived in a house by myself, and for about 4 years. And I now live in a house that adjoins that house, and I have a housemate, and we kind of have what I think of as a wonderful experience, because we have separate kitchens. We get to see each other as much as or as little as we want. And along the way, if anybody would like to know, there's lots of ins and out of that. And that's why in my book, I have the circuitous route to community, because it was not a straight line by any means. And the person that I live with is younger than me. She's about 10 years younger than me, if that matters.
Wonderful. Thank you, Marianne.
Mhm.
Next question is from Ellen. I like all the options presented today, though I would like to hear more about which options put you in a better position when you need additional help. That can be from the reliable tradesperson to additional help with daily life.
Well, I have a personal feeling about that, and that is, I mean, looking at where I live, I have what is to me the best, because I've been doing this for a while, and I'm blessed to have the funds to do it. And that is, I have a housemate. I get, and I have some income from that. And at some point, that part of the house could be for someone to take care of me. That's sort of what I am thinking of. Does that answer your question? And again, the other part of that is, you asked which of those models would be best for as you move through the continuum of care. Lots of people that live in co-housing are huge proponents of that, and I have to believe that that is the case. I don't live in that. I live in but I do live in a shared house on purpose, in what I consider an organic, intentional neighborhood where I know all my neighbors, where we interact on a regular basis. So there's close, a little bit, another circle, and then there's the possibility of what's next after that. And that might be a paid person that lives with me. And I think probably if you look at the model of Elder Spirit, which is elderspirit.org, they have a model that they have worked out for years. And I think that is, a lot of times people talk about co-housing, that you could have a caregiver in the common house. I don't know about that. I don't know if that's something that any of the co-housers could answer that question, if it's actually a doable kind of thing. Other questions?
Yeah, thank you, Marianne. We have a couple about affordability. This one, can you speak to limited equity housing cooperatives? I'm finding it, sorry, I'm having difficulty with this question. I'm finding it to offer strong community with 27 members in separate units, and it's very affordable in Northern California.
You know, when you started the question, I realized probably that is not my area of expertise. So I won't even guess at that one, but 27 people will probably make it very affordable. And I hope that you learn a lot about NBC.
That's a fair answer. Thank you, Marianne. This one is from Kim. What about people who have chronically ill and debilitated for a long time with not a lot of money saved nor ability to share labor? Is it still possible to find affordable options to buy into cool places? I am a physical therapist by training / past.
I wish I had the perfect answer to that. And I don't really, other than many in some countries, not ours yet, maybe someday, And that is students sometimes live with elders, and that model of students, elders, there's also communities that have foster children live with elders, which is a really affordable possibility for both of them, and they get that connection of an elder and a child that doesn't possibly have a family at that point. That's not what you're actually asking or talking about. And I wish there were, because that would be a great resource for, you know, someone like yourself who is in PT. Yeah. That I'm afraid I don't know. And I'm willing to say so.
Thank you, Marianne. Appreciate that. The next question is from Wendy. Are there models of multi-generational communities with a section that provides professionally assisted continuum of care?
Not yet, is what I would say. I mean, it's these kinds of conversations that make it possible for us to move towards something like that. And that's the challenge. Is a lot of people will ask me, you know, I want this kind of thing, or I want this kind of thing, I want this kind of model. And I wish I could say, go to the phone book. I said phone book. Did I? Go to the internet and look up, you know, communities for continuum of care that also include, you know, these things. We have to do it ourselves. That's what the Foundation for Intentional Communities is about, that we come together and figure these things out so that they can become a model, much like co-housing, much like shared housing, that we're learning about these things, that then we can take the next step to make these possibilities. And we're not just counting on the continuing care retirement communities to do it all.
Yes, thank you for that. Oh, good question from Danielle. What are your suggestions for creating a community that is more inclusive and supportive of its elders as they age?
I think the first part is clearly, the question is the desire to do so. The desire to have the elders part of the conversation and be part of what is it, what does care look like for you, to be part of that conversation. And I think also to look at the possibility of, you know, we're all aging, to include all ages in that conversation, so that the teens, the children, the working population can see what the elders have to contribute to the community. Yeah, co-ops, sure.
Thank you, Marianne. Just to get some more voices in the room here, I see a couple raised hands. So I'm going to call on Angela. Do you want to ask your question, Angela?
It wasn't really a question. I was just responding to one of Marianne's questions with a raised hand. Sorry about that.
Oh, no worries. Thank you for that, Angela. All right. What about Therese? Did you have a question? Right, Therese. What about you, Joyce? Did you have a question you wanted to ask Marianne?
I made a comment in the chat in response to the question about intentional intergenerational community with elder care. I think somebody asked a question about that, and I do know about the fellowship community, which is the Steiner community in New York State that does that. So I put that in the chat. I'm very familiar with it. They do have a long waiting list, but it might be one community that you said you didn't know of one. So I thought I would let you know.
Great. Hey, I'm clearly don't know it all by any means. Thank you so much.
You're welcome.
All right, what about you, Michael? What's your question? All right, Michael, you'll need to unmute.
Yes, thank you so much. A friend of mine had mentioned that offering elder care has become a business model for intentional community, as in offering services can be a source of financial support for the community in general. Can you speak to anything like that? Have you seen anything like that specifically?
I wouldn't. I mean, caregiving is on a very serious thing to do. And to care for elders, I think within the community setting would be far better. I don't know about making it into a business. I don't know if anybody has done that. And I don't know if anybody's probably wanting to do that. So I'd like to say, go for it if that's something that calls to you, because certainly there's plenty of need for our elders to be cared for.
Yes, certainly. And thank you so much for sharing what you did. I can just imagine that if, you know, the right entrepreneurs and the right people with the right heart get into it, it can become a model that people go to a place that's peaceful, or if that's what they're looking for, if they're looking for a rural setting or whatever that is. My
Mhm.
partner is starting a wellness company in conjunction with the intentional community that we're part of. So I'm really grateful for everything that you shared, and I'm hoping to channel a lot of what you shared into what we hope to build in our community. So thank you.
You're very well. Thank you. Go for it is all I got to say.
Wonderful, thank you, Michael. Vitala, nice to see you. What's your question?
Hi, I feel like a broken record. I just have concerns about cleaning products and chemical sensitivities in community. It's been a real stumbling block for me in joining together with others. Like even if my house is too close to someone else's house, if they use cleaning products and I have asthma and respiratory concerns, it's just been a real concern that I've had difficulty navigating. I don't know if you've run into this, and with the pandemic, even more so, cleaning products give out, it's like, I just didn't know if you had any thoughts about that you could share.
Well, I feel for you. I mean, I actually, at one point in my experimentation, I guess I would say exploration, I stayed temporarily with somebody who had a huge issue with, scents and all that. And I remember I went with, it was like deodorant, hairspray, all those things, you can't use any of those, which deodorant, I kind of needed, but not to make light of what your issues are by any means. I think it reminds me of the things that I talked about in a shared house that cause conflict. You have an additional thing that people oftentimes don't respect or understand.
Right.
So, that's one more thing. The only thing that comes to mind for me is, based on my experiences, the larger the community, the better the chances are that it's going to be a difficult thing to navigate. So I would say that if you can have a shared house where someone also might have the same sensitivities, that then understands what you're going through. and respects what you're talking about. That would be where I would go. And also, I think that now we have something that I completely forgot about when we were talking about community, is this. We have virtual communities now. We can talk to each other about, hey, I have this sensitivity. There's a possibility that I want to live in and around other people. Can we get together virtually and form a group? I would say that, as a start, because
Makes
yeah.
sense. Thank you. Yeah, right. Why put another obstacle in the midst of all the other ones? So, yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much. I hadn't thought that through. Thank you.
You're
Thank
very welcome. You made me do it. That's okay.
Wonderful questions. Thank you, everyone. Let's see, Cheryl, you want to go ahead and ask your question?
Okay, so I'm moving from a shelter. Both my brother are in a homeless shelter into housing, look into like an apartment kind of living situation with separate apartments, kind of like the shared model. He's 71 and I'm 64. And so I was like wondering what her thoughts are about that, because it's not really an intentional community, but it will be a situation where there will be multiple ages within the building. But the other like barrier is COVID and the upsurge in it, which is like isolated a lot of us from each other.
Mhm.
And how do you work with that with intentional housing?
Can you give me an easier question now?
Yeah, I'd like to know about the tiny houses. I'd love to do a tiny house. Yeah, but yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I would start with your first part of that, which is congratulations to be moving into your own place or your own
Yeah.
shared place. What I would say when you're moving in, I don't know what, the arrangements are physically,
Yeah.
I don't know if you're sharing a bathroom or if you have separate. Again, that's where you run into conflict. So I would say, especially when it's not somebody that you know, get to know them, sit down
Right.
and say, tell me everything. No, tell me, I love questions. You might have
Right.
noticed that. And that is, tell me what your favorite meal is. Tell me, get them easy into it little by little, because what you want to do is get to know that person. But there's another piece of that. You don't get to only ask the questions. You have to answer questions that person is asking you. So you move into, we're getting into a relationship. It might be a little bit unusual. Well, yeah, it's unusual. And then the next thing I would say is to have some written down agreements.
Okay.
There's nothing worse than, wait, you said, and she said, and I said, don't. When how are you going to, who's going to do the dishes? Do we leave dishes in the sink? I can't tell you the number of times people have been mad at dishes in the sink. So look at where the based on your physical environment, look around. You guys are going to know where the conflict's going to, and when that's the next thing is you have written agreements about the 5 things that I mentioned there.
Right.
And the next thing is that you say, what happens before it happens? What happens before there's a problem?
Right.
Because to say we're never going to have a conflict or a fight or a disagreement is impossible. We're people, and you're in an environment with someone new. So I would say, what do you look like on a bad day? When you're stressed, you tell that person, my face gets all contorted and my voice goes up and, something like that. And then they know, and they can say, well, when I've had a really bad day, I just want to be alone. I don't want to talk to
Right.
anybody. I don't want you in my room. I don't know. I want you to say, I love you, nothing. But you need to know those things so that you don't walk into the lion's den and get your head chopped off.
Right.
So I would say, get to know the person, be vulnerable with yourself. That's the best example. Have written agreements and be ready to, on two things, both when conflict starts, and the other thing is, how are we going to make decisions?
Mm-hmm.
You know, so is this a democracy? Is it an autocracy? Is it I'm in charge? What is it? But when it comes and use example, you know, say, okay, when we get to, you know, what are we going to keep the temperature at in the house?
Right.
I like it cold, you like it hot. What are we going to do? Does that give you some ideas?
Yeah, that gives me some great ideas. 'Cause, I mean, yeah,
Mhm.
it'll be a change, but I think it'll be a positive change. So just have to have a
Yeah.
or a a plan. You have to have a plan.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. I would, and if you go into it with the positiveness of this is, and again, this is an experience. This is an experiment.
Mm-hmm.
This is not the end of the world. We're going to work this out.
Right.
Good luck.
All right. Well, thank you so much.
Oh, you're welcome.
Yes, thank you for your answer to that question, Marianne, and sending you good vibes, Cheryl, for the
Thank you.
next stage in your journey.
Absolutely.
So I'm going to switch over to the chat. Here is a question that says, you mentioned the importance of NVC when living in close quarters with others and how important it is to find compatible people. Is it not also important to become more compatible people ourselves, or is it too late for older people to become more emotionally and spiritually mature?
Boy, I'm busted on that one. Thank you. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that because when I give talks, I often talk about the importance of the three Ps. The people when you're looking at community, who are they? The place, we talked a little bit about the place, the physical place too. And the third P is the personal tools that we show up with. That is conflict resolution skills, that is decision making, that is communication skills, that is knowing ourselves and doing some interpersonal work. So yeah, definitely you need to know yourself going into this and what's in your toolkit that you go into a community experience with. And I'm not willing, one, to call myself elderly. I don't care if I get the vaccine or not. I'm not calling myself elderly no matter what happens. I will be an elder. And just an aside on this is when I talked to Dean Peterson, she was so funny. She said, Dean is 90, going strong. And she said, now the new people that moved into our community, they're younger, you know, they're in their anywhere six. She said, we're calling them elders. And if you're over 90, you're called old. Little aside for you. Hopefully that helped you as well on developing our interpersonal skills to be the kind of people that we want to be in community.
Absolutely. So I'm looking at the time. We're just a little bit over, but there's one more question that I was hoping you could answer for us, Marianne, as we move towards the end here. This one's from Sumi. At the bottom of the presentation slides, I see the link below. Can you please share more about it? Thank you. And that's the womenlivingincommunity.com.
I was wondering if anybody would ask about that. It's not, bye John, it's not to alienate other genders. It just so happens I am a woman, and way back when I started this, thanks Neil, when I started this, it seemed like mainly women were interested in aging in community. I also feel that women are nurturers of community and relationships. So I started Women Living in Community. I have a website, I have a Facebook page. If you go to the next slide, you could also, there's a way to call me and contact me. Did I get to your question? of what it is. It's pretty much encouraging, advocating for community. And it doesn't necessarily have to be women living with women, living around women. It's just us as the nurturers and advocates for the importance of community. Just like Scott Peck says, maybe we'll save the world.
Beautiful. Thank you, Marianne. And thank you so much for just the wealth of information that you've shared with us today and answering all of these questions. My apologies to all of you that didn't get your questions answered. As you can see here, Marianne has provided her contact information. Feel free to reach out to her. Please also keep an eye on your inbox. I will be sending a link to the recording of this session, as well as a link to the chat to you a little later today. That email may land in spam, so keep an eye out there as well. And again, thank you all for joining us today. Marianne, I'm just so grateful for your time and your wisdom. Thank you so much again. That's all we have for you. So thank you again for joining. Hope to see you at another event soon. And I hope you all take care and do something nice for yourself today. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye-bye. Thank you.